They whispered he was the god of Apex Tower, a god in an Italian suit, making decisions with a mere furrow of his brow, cutting benefits as if they were nothing more than spare paper clips. This morning, that god walked through the lobby and a latte tray flew in a perfect arc, slamming onto his chest. The entire lobby held its breath. No one dared to move. Only the new secretary, hands still trembling, had the nerve to say, half joking, half serious, "At least the coffee smell makes your suit smell better." And then, the cold gaze, like a steel door, fell on her. This was Seattle. This was Whitaker and Vale. And Damon Whitaker never forgave. Nova Hale was late. To make matters worse, her stiletto heels slipped on the mirror-shiny stone floor. The coffee tray flew out of her hands. 2 cups spun through the air, landing squarely on the CEO's midnight blue jacket. Steam rose. The smell of espresso mingled with expensive cologne like a declaration of war. The reception hall went dead silent. Kayla at the front desk held her breath. Security guard Miguel looked up from his phone. The open elevator seemed to clamp down on the silence. Damon Whitaker's eyes dropped to the brown stain spreading on his jacket, then lifted. That look passed over Nova, through Nova, as if she were a wrong number on a report. His jaw tightened. "Do you know what you just did?" His voice was flat and low, and he did not need volume to make anyone feel smaller. Nova swallowed. "I spilled coffee on your suit, but it's a premium latte. If we're talking scent, it might actually raise its value." The words fell like a pebble tossed onto an ice-covered pond. Small, but the surface cracked. "This is a custom Italian suit." Damon pressed each word. "It's worth more than your annual salary." Nova froze for a beat, then smirked thin, defiant. "Then today your jacket smells like my annual salary." There were gasps. A muffled chuckle quickly covered. Damon stepped closer. She caught the subtle cologne now faintly overpowered by coffee. Yes, a power statement in scent. Name he asked. "Nova. Nova Hale. Your new secretary." She kept her gaze steady. A flicker of curiosity, very brief, crossed Damon's eyes. Then it vanished. 10 minutes. My office. Bring a towel." His eyes dropped to the fallen tray, and then he walked off. Whispers rose behind her like a small wave. The elevator swallowed Nova, carrying her to the 27th floor. Each passing floor was another possible outcome of being humiliated in front of the whole company. She was fired on her first day, becoming a hallway legend, the girl who took down the CEO with a latte. When she arrived, the door to his office was open. Damon's back was to the window, looking out over the foggy city. "Come in." He didn't turn around. Nova stepped inside, towel in hand like a white flag. "I'm sorry about earlier. It was truly an accident." He turned. The stain was still damp on his jacket, but in his eyes, there wasn't just anger. There was assessment. "You don't make an impression with a latte, Hale. You make it to work." He set a stack of files on the desk. "Here's today's work. Let's see if you type better than you pour coffee." Nova lifted her chin. For the coffee part. The floor was too slippery. For the typing part. I guarantee it. The corner of Damon's mouth very slightly, like a shadow twitched, then stopped. "You can go. And Hale, don't spill anything else on me. Yes, boss." The door closed. Nova stood outside, hearing her heart pound like a war drum. Not fired, not yet. At 8:15 the intercom buzzed. Cold as wind off Puget Sound, Hale. My office. Now. Nova took a deep breath and stepped in. Damon didn't look up. I have a few small things. The word small left his lips and landed on the desk like a nail. Organize all the financial files alphabetically, then by date, then by relevance. Done before lunch. He paused, as if remembering to add seasoning. And I need a detailed report on the third floor's productivity. Today, by 5. Also, a silver paperclip. Only silver, not gold, not chrome. Silver. Nova raised an eyebrow. A silver paperclip. 4. You don't need to know. He closed the file. You can leave. The glass door behind her reflected a face holding back a grin. Want a war? The voice in Nova's head was slow, clear, like etched in stone. Fine. Office war. 2 hours later, the sound of metal spilling echoed in Damon's office like coins being poured out. He pushed the door open, stopped. Eyes widened. Damon Whitaker's desk was buried in silver paperclips. Thousands. Glinting like silver fish in bright water. Nova stood in the middle of the silver rain, smiling like a cat that had stolen the fish. I brought every silver paperclip I could find. You pick the right one. She set a folder on the only clean corner of the desk. Productivity report with full charts. Oh, and the financial files are sorted alphabetically, by date, by relevance. I also added categories for folder color and document thickness, just in case you wanted a tactile experience. Staff began to gather behind the glass wall, murmuring like waves. Damon exhaled very slowly. A plan to crush her spirit had just slipped. His eyes stopped on Nova. Something shifted. A mix of annoyance and something new. Tomorrow, my desk. Clean, and the coffee makes it regular. Nova winked. Yes, boss. As she walked out, Damon stood among the tiny silver gleams. For the first time in years, a thought flickered, and then annoyed him for existing. Maybe. I'm enjoying this. Don't forget to subscribe to Cruel Revenge so you don't miss the next part. The next morning, Nova arrived early. Very early. The Seattle sky was still dotted with mist. The 27th floor office was as silent as a museum. But Nova didn't head straight to her desk. She walked directly into the shared kitchen, opened her fabric tote bag, and began to set things out. Freshly baked pastries from a bakery in Fremont are fragrant and release warmth like a greeting. Hand-brewed coffee, the aroma of Arabica spreading out, waking even the most difficult people. But it wasn't just the food. Each pastry was tied with a small note containing handwritten messages, not flashy, not flowery, but it hit right in the heart. Thank you for keeping the system running smoothly every day. You deserve to take a break and smile. Not everyone in a suit is a hero, but you might be... When Sandra from IT walked in, her eyes widened. What is this Operation Smile? Nova answered softly, handing Sandra a pastry. Today, everyone eats well, drinks well. No reason needed. Within 10 minutes, the kitchen was packed. Laughter rang out. The faces that usually stayed buried in screens were now bright, like neon lights outside Pike Place. Maria, the janitor, stood in the doorway, still holding her mop. Nova handed her 2 pastries, one for you, one for Connie on the 15th floor. Don't say no. Maria opened the note attached. After reading it, her eyes reddened. Thank you for noticing us. Without you, this office would drown in chaos. Everyone needs to know that, Nova said, gently hugging Maria's shoulder. And then, a tall figure blocked the doorway. Damon Whitaker, charcoal suit, gray tie, eyes like clouds before a storm. The whole room went silent, except for the sound of the coffee machine dripping. "What's going on here?" His voice cut through the air like a scalpel. Nova turned around, strangely calm. "Breakfast. Want to try ham and cheese? Totally worth it. In my office. Now." She set the pastry tray down and lifted her chin. "Everyone, keep eating." Then she followed him, the click of her heels echoing coldly down the hallway. The door closed. Damon turned. "What do you think you're doing? This is not summer camp." "No," Nova cut in. "This is a company where you're draining your employees. I'm just giving back a little humanity. Humanity doesn't generate profit, but it keeps people, and people generate profit." A heavy silence, their eyes locked. No flinching, no cooling down. At that moment, Nova saw something flash fatigued. Doubt before Damon turned away. "I didn't hire you to change the company culture." "No," she replied, her voice lower. "You hired me to work, and I'm working for everyone here, including you." She turned toward the door. "If you're done with the scolding, I have to save an intern from the stapler." Damon said nothing. The door clicked shut. He stood there, listening to the laughter drifting from the kitchen, mingled with the smell of coffee and a strange, unsettling feeling, as if, for the first time in years, the control in his hands had just shifted, all because of a tray of pastries. 3 days had passed since the Smile campaign, and the Whitaker and Vale office felt as if it had been infused with new blood. Employees greeted each other louder and smiled more, but Nova knew this feeling was only temporary. Damon Whitaker was not the type of man to overlook a challenge to his authority. On Monday morning, at exactly $1,000, his voice came through the intercom. Cold, concise Hale. "My office. Bring your notebook." She walked in and noticed a thick file on his desk. The word confidential was stamped in red on the cover. "How do you explain this?" He pointed to a printed chart. Nova glanced quickly. It was a detailed breakdown of benefit cuts over the past 6 months, health insurance, lunch stipends, commuting assistance, all gone from employee paychecks. "Do you want me to explain the numbers or the consequences?" Nova replied. "This is classified information. Only the executive board is allowed to see it." "So when Maria said her insurance was cut, or Tom said he no longer had a bus pass, was that classified too?" Damon straightened, his voice as hard as steel. "That was a management decision, necessary for the company to stay competitive. The company made $23 million in profit last quarter." Nova shot back, flipping through a few pages of her notes. Keeping those benefits would cost only $300,000 a year. That's less than a fraction of what you spend on custom suits. The corner of his mouth twitched. "You don't have access to payroll data. I don't need it. Basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division will do." The air in the room grew dense. Nova felt his eyes linger on her longer than usual, not the scrutinizing kind, more like an unspoken question. "Why do you care this much?" "Because someone has to," she said, answering the question he hadn't voiced. "And it seems you've forgotten how." Nova stood, turning toward the door. Before stepping out, she paused. "You know the difference between a leader and a boss, right? A leader takes care of the people who follow them. A boss just counts the money." The door clicked shut. Damon sat still, staring at the file but unable to read a single word. In his mind, her words echoed with every beat. That evening, Damon's office lights were still on long after most employees had gone home. He wasn't working. He was just watching from above as Nova chatted with the IT team, her smile warming the entire space. A white envelope lay on his desk, handwriting sharp and neat, spelled out Damon Whitaker. Inside was a small card, bearing a single-line dinner, 800 p.m., Levante restaurant, and no explanation, no signature, but he knew exactly who it was from. Nova arrived at Levante at exactly 8:05, just enough to avoid seeming too eager. But when the maitre d' led her to the table, her heart skipped. It wasn't just Damon. There were 4 strangers, 2 men, 2 women, all with the air of high-level business. Damon stood, smiling, actually smiling. Nova Hale, our Director of Strategic Development. Director Nova kept her face composed as she shook each hand. Patrick Shaw, investor; Melissa Grant, financial advisor; Adrian Shaw, Patrick's son; and Jordan Marks from a major city law firm. Damon poured wine, speaking smoothly as if Nova had been his right hand for years. She's improved company performance by over 20%. Nova nearly choked. Part of her wanted to laugh. Just last week, he tried to push her out, and now he was elevating her at a dinner table. Patrick tilted his head. Impressive. Where did you study business actually? I studied communications, Nova replied, glancing at Damon. But I believe good communication is the foundation of performance. Their eyes met a silent challenge. He was using her to impress, and she would use this chance to say what she wanted. Midway through the main course, Nova dropped a line like bait onto the table. We're also reviewing some HR policies. Cutting benefits might save a little, but keeping employees happy is the real profit. Damon froze for half a second, but under Patrick and Melissa's attentive gaze, he nodded as if it were his own idea. Exactly. I'd rather have motivated employees than a few $1,000s in a reserve fund. Nova raised her glass, smiling like an angel. Underneath, she knew. The rules of this game had just changed. When dessert had just been served, Damon's phone vibrated sharply on the table. He glanced at the screen, and his expression changed so seriously that no one dared continue the conversation. Excuse me, I have to take this call. He stepped away from the table, his voice lowered but still sharp enough for Nova to catch every brisk, clipped movement. 5 minutes later, Damon returned. Sorry, everyone, but I have to leave immediately. An incident at the Tacoma plant. He put on his jacket, then turned to Nova. Can you? Nova didn't even have the chance to ask, can I what, before he continued. Keep the conversation on track. I'll call Patrick on Monday. And then he was gone, leaving Nova at the table with 4 important guests and a bill that was certainly not small. Jordan broke the silence. Mr. Whitaker must trust you a lot to leave you like this. Nova smiled and took a sip of wine. We're a team. Each of us knows when it's our turn to step up. When the waiter brought the check, Nova glanced at the 4 figures. Luckily, in her bag was a weapon she had prepared the week before Damon's company card, borrowed under the pretense of buying office supplies. She handed it to the waiter, as calmly as if she were signing for a coffee receipt. The dinner ended in a warm atmosphere. Melissa said she wanted to discuss the staffing proposals more, and Patrick promised to get in touch. Nova shook each of their hands, knowing full well Damon would read their reports and see exactly who had kept the game going. The next morning, Damon showed up unusually early, His gaze swept over Nova like a laser. Then he disappeared into his office. 15 minutes later, he emerged holding a stack of bright yellow papers, the dinner bill, along with a desk completely covered in sticky notes. Call Mom. One was stuck to the computer screen. Smile for no reason. Another was on the desk phone. Don't scare the new hires. Was stuck to his Mont Blanc pen. The last one, as big as a hand, right in the center of the screen. Admit Hale is right at least once today. Damon peeled each note off, his eyes growing darker. At Nova's desk, he set the entire stack down. We need to talk. About dinner or about the sticky notes. Both. Especially the $1,200 on the company card. Nova leaned back in her chair, not flinching. An investment in image? You'll get more than that back from Patrick and Melissa. You. Damon began to push back, but Sandra from IT hurried over, whispering into Nova's ear, You need to see this. On Sandra's phone screen was a photo Nova and Damon at the restaurant, wine glasses touching, captioned, Has the ice-cold boss found love, along with dozens of comments from employees, half teasing, half serious. Damon clenched his jaw. Who posted this? No idea, but it's all over the internal group now. Sandra retreated, leaving the two of them standing in a pocket of uncomfortable silence. Nova picked up the stack of sticky notes, her eyes fearless. Are you worried about what others think, or about what you're starting to think yourself? Damon looked at her, for the first time not answering right away. There was something not anger, but unease, flickering behind the usual cold facade. Damon stood still behind the closed office door, his back to the glass window overlooking the street. Seattle had a light morning fog, the surface of Elliott Bay shimmering with silvery light. But inside the room, the air was thick. Sit down, he said, his voice no longer carrying the usual sharp command, but something slower and heavier. Nova pulled out a chair, keeping just the right amount of distance. He placed the newspaper on the desk. That morning's business section was filled with a photo from that night. 2 glasses of wine clinking, and Damon looking at Nova with a smile that was hard to explain. The headline read, CEO Whitaker has a new flame inside source says. Nova looked him straight in the eye. What exactly are you planning to ask me? That picture wasn't taken by me. I don't care who took it. Damon replied, his eyes still on the paper. The problem is, I just got a call from the Federal Audit Office. Someone sent them information claiming the company has a shell account for tax evasion. The words dropped like a stone. Nova leaned forward. You think it's me? No. He said so quickly that it caught her off guard. I think it's someone else. But I need your eyes. You notice what I miss. That afternoon, the conference room on the 27th floor turned into a battlefield of paperwork. Stacks of financial reports, bank statements, and contracts covered the table. Damon flipped through each page, Nova scanning every line. This one. She pointed to a cost table. Hartman and Associates, $20,000 a month, steady for the past 2 years, Purpose General Strategic Consulting. Sounds too vague. Damon frowned. Never heard of them. And it started. Exactly 1 week after we signed that big deal with Shaw Corporation. Nova looked up. You're thinking what I'm thinking. I don't believe in coincidences, he said. An hour later, Damon pulled an old file from his private cabinet. Nova opened its childhood photos, young Damon in a suit, standing alone at a lavish birthday party with no guests, on stage receiving an award, the auditorium filled with empty seats. Friends, Nova asked softly, Never had many, Damon replied, his voice carrying an uncharacteristic low note. Except for one, Robert Williams. He paused. We lost touch. 5 years ago, a Robert Chen applied to be CFO. I didn't recognize him. Nova gripped the file tightly. And now, this Robert Chen has ties to Hartman and Associates direct ties. Damon nodded, his gaze heavy. If I'm right, he's been using his position to siphon money and build evidence against me. The trap was set that very night. Nova would create a fake investment contract full of enticing figures and then accidentally leave it visible on the system that only the CFO could access. The FBI, called in by Damon, would be watching. The next day, just as predicted, Robert took the bait. Near noon, the information leaked to an out-of-state server. At exactly 300 p.m., agents walked in, and the click of handcuffs closed the deal. From the glass office, Nova watched the scene with a feeling that was part satisfaction, part chill. Damon stood beside her, his eyes fixed on the man who had once been his only friend. You okay? Nova asked quietly. No, he said, then exhaled. But at least I know who really betrayed me. Late at night, only the desk lamps lit the office. Damon leaned against Nova's doorway. You saved this company. And me. Nova gave a faint smile. It's my job. No. He shook his head. It's more than that. Between them, there was now a silence without sharp edges. Just the space of two people who had fought a battle together and survived. And somewhere out there, in Seattle's night, the long horn of a tugboat over the bay seemed to mark the beginning of something new. Don't forget to subscribe to Cruel Revenge to follow the next part and find out what happens after the betrayer is exposed. 3 days after Robert's arrest, the atmosphere at Whitaker and Vale was completely different. Employees came to work with a sense of relief, as if they had just escaped an invisible storm. But inside Damon's office, the clouds still lingered. Nova stood in front of his desk, handing over the final folder from the investigation. All the evidence has been turned over to the FBI. There's no more money flowing out. Damon nodded, his gaze briefly showing a trace of weariness. Good. But the damage to our reputation will take time to recover. Nova noticed that his voice, though calm, carried a subtle offbeat note. It wasn't the cold steel CEO she had once met. He looked more like a man who had just lost a part of his past, even if that part had betrayed him. Have you talked to him yet? She asked. No, and I'm not sure I want to. He paused, then spoke as if confessing something. Robert was the only one who stood by me when everything felt empty. I trusted him, Nova, blindly. A silence stretched between them. In Nova's mind, images from old photographs flashed young Damon in an ill-fitting suit, standing in the middle of a balloon-filled room without a single other child in sight. You weren't blind, Nova said softly. You just wanted to believe in someone. At noon, Nova took the files down to the archive room and found Maria struggling with a supply cart. Ms. Hale, I heard you were the one who helped catch the person hurting the company, Maria asked, her eyes bright. Nova smiled. Not just me. Everyone here played a part, even if they didn't know it. Maria touched Nova's hand, her voice low. Thank you. Not every CEO would let employees like me keep our jobs after something like this. Nova stayed quiet for a moment, knowing Damon had decided to keep the entire staff and restore all benefits as soon as the truth came out. For a man who once saw employees as numbers, that was a turning point. That afternoon, Damon appeared at Nova's desk unexpectedly. "I want you to come with me tonight. A charity event at Shaw Industries." Nova raised an eyebrow. "I thought you hated those events. I need to observe a few people, and I need someone who can talk to them without making me lose my temper." The last remark made Nova laugh. "So, fake girlfriend Damon looked at her a moment longer than necessary, if you want to call it that." The ballroom at the Fairmont Hotel glowed under crystal chandeliers. Soft jazz wove through the hum of conversation and laughter. Damon and Nova walked in, drawing glances partly because of her elegant off-shoulder black dress, partly because few had ever seen Damon smile while arriving with a woman. They moved past clusters of people chatting. Damon kept his poised demeanor, but Nova noticed the subtle tension in his hand when he shook Patrick Shaw's hand. After a few polite exchanges, Nova leaned toward him. "Who do you want me to talk to Melissa Grant?" He replied quietly, "She's close to one of Hartman's partners." Nova crossed the room, slipping into Melissa's conversation circle as if they'd known each other for years. She listened, occasionally dropping in harmless questions about Hartman's ties to recent projects. Meanwhile, Damon watched from across the room, his gaze following her. He realized she moved between groups like water through the cracks in stone, graceful, yet finding the right path. He had once seen her as a rebellious employee who needed to be kept in line. Now, he knew he was watching a true partner. When Nova returned, her eyes gleamed. Melissa said Hartman once tried to muscle into a contract in Portland but was blocked by Robert himself, which means he didn't just use his position to siphon money, but also to steer projects his way. Damon gave a slight nod, his lips pressed together. Another piece of the betrayals puzzle had fallen into place. Damon and Nova left the Fairmont ballroom just as the clock struck 10 p.m. Outside, Seattle was still damp and cold, streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement like streaks of mercury. They walked side by side, unhurried, letting the wind carry away the unfinished conversations from the party. "You did well," Damon said after a moment of silence. Nova tilted her head, half smiling. "That's the first time I've heard you give a compliment without following it with a but." He gave a faint smile, but his eyes stayed thoughtful. "Because I'm trying to figure out how to fit the last piece of this puzzle." They got into the car, the sound of the engine mixing with the light patter of rain starting to tap against the roof. Damon pulled out his phone and opened his notes. "Melissa mentioned a shell company in Portland. If we can trace the money flow from Hartman to that, then we'll know who's really pulling the strings." Nova finished his thought. The next morning, Nova brought coffee into Damon's office and found him already buried in his screen, surrounded by a forest of documents. "I've asked the legal team to dig deeper. That Portland company is directly linked to an investment fund owned by the Shaw family." Nova froze. "Patrick Shaw." Damon nodded. "Exactly. This explains why Robert's been protected for so long, and it also explains why Hartman keeps targeting our contracts." Without hesitation, Nova suggested, "We need to get ahead. Go public with every single transaction before they can build any more false accusations." Damon looked at her, his gaze decisive. "Let's do it together." That afternoon, a surprise press conference was held at Whitaker and Vale. Reporters packed the ground floor auditorium, camera flashes firing in rapid bursts. Damon stepped up to the podium, with Nova standing just to his right. "This past week," Damon began, his voice deep and clear, Our company has been attacked with false accusations. Today, we are releasing our complete financial records to prove our transparency. The screen behind him lit up with charts, figures, and suspicious transactions carried out by Robert, all clearly annotated. Nova took over the next part, explaining the new internal audit procedures that would be implemented to protect the interests of employees and shareholders. Questions came rapid fire, cameras zoomed in tight, but this time, Damon didn't evade. He answered directly, occasionally glancing at Nova as if to reaffirm we're on the same side. When the press conference ended, the reporters were still murmuring among themselves in the elevator back to the 27th floor. Nova leaned lightly against the wall, feeling tired but relieved. Damon stood beside her, still holding the file folder. "You know," he said quietly, "if it weren't for you, I would have let this spiral into a dead end." Nova let out a weary laugh. "If it weren't for you, I would have been fired on my first day for spilling coffee." A brief silence passed, free of the weight of suspicion or power. Just two people who had survived a long battle together. At the end of the day, Nova packed up her desk, glanced out the window, and saw Damon talking to Maria. They were both smiling. The sight made her realize this man had changed. Not perfect, but enough to step out from behind his cold shell. And she had changed, too. No longer the nervous news secretary fumbling in the lobby on her first day, but an indispensable part of this high-stakes game. From a spilled latte on an Italian suit to high-stakes battles in the boardroom and an unlikely partnership to bring down a traitor. Nova and Damon had traveled a road no one could have predicted. They began as two parallel lines, clashing and challenging each other, but eventually found common ground when the survival of the entire company was on the line. This story isn't just about power or money. It's about trust rebuilt from the rubble and about how people can change when someone has the courage to look straight at the parts they've tried to hide. And this is only the beginning. Don't forget to subscribe to Cruel Revenge for more unexpected and emotional stories to come.